Hello, hello, everybody. Happy Saturday to you.
Hello, hello.
I just checked to make sure that we are indeed live and we have audio. So I am very excited to be here. It has been a great week of learning and uncovering gems and doing all of the things that we all have to do to stay on top of our lives. So this week was Exodus 1 through 22, and of course, Genesis 50. And Genesis 50 was just the death of Joseph. And we are going to hop right in. I'm excited to get going. I would love to make these less than an hour. So we'll see how we do today, but still get everything in. Okay. So, as usual, if you would like the schedule that we're following, you can go to BibleRoom.org and download that schedule for yourself, or you can follow your own schedule. That particular schedule has the links to the YouTube playlist for the soundtrack of the Bible reading for that particular week, that particular portion. So that is in the King James Version. You're welcome to use any other version that you like, but it does tell you the exact thing that will be coming up next. Okay, so with that in mind, I am going to go ahead and put myself back on the screen for a moment so I can get the screen share um, set up. So I'm trying something new this week, which is presenting directly from Canva. If you don't know what Canva is, it's like an online graphic design package. Well, I didn't know that you could upload a PowerPoint presentation directly to Canva and it looks really good. Like the presentation I used last week, I imported it into Canva and it looks amazing. And it separated out all of the objects and elements, and you can manipulate them all in Canva. Just completely mind blowing. And that's good because that takes away some of the different things I have to do the live stream. So now I am starting the stream over here and I will do the screen share. And this will make it so much easier. Okay, so you should be able to see the screen now. Let me see, could I put myself? Yeah, I'll have to figure out how to put myself back on there. But as usual, hopefully you can still hear me. Let me make sure. As usual. Yep, I heard myself. Okay, okay, so I want to go back to my screen here that has my notes, and we're gonna keep going. Okay, so this week I got really interested in doing some more follow up to the story of Joseph in prison in Potiphar's house. Well, when it first talks about him being in prison, it doesn't say that he was in Potiphar's house. But what it does say is when what it does say is when the butcher and the butler got Pharaoh mad and they were thrown in prison, that the captain of the guard gave Joseph the assignment of looking after them. And it said that the butcher and the baker were in the prison in Potiphar's house with Joseph. So that meant Joseph was in prison in Potiphar's house. So when you go back and look at the part where it says that he found favor, that Joseph found favor with the warden of the prison, we now know that the prison was in Potiphar's house. The warden was in Potiphar's house. Potiphar was in Potiphar's house. So it would be reasonable to assume that Potiphar and the warden had a relationship. They knew each other. Maybe the warden even knew Joseph before he was put in prison because they all served in Potiphar's house. So when Joseph interpreted the dreams of the butcher, of the baker and the butler, I don't know why I keep calling him the butcher, of the baker and the butler, and of course King James Version says butler, and other revisions say for the butler calls him the cupbearer. But the baker and the butcher sounds, I mean, that's two B's. It's easy to remember. So they were actually in prison together, all of them. And the fact that Potiphar gave Joseph some more responsibilities, that means he still trusts him. And then I also uncovered that the job that Potiphar had as the chief of the chief of the guard, he was responsible for executing people. That was one of the definitions on there. So if that was true, and you've got this Hebrew messing with your wife, why wouldn't you just, you know, execute him? But he didn't do that. He put him in prison. So when Joseph interpreted the dreams of his colleagues, and Pharaoh had his dream, and he actually had called all the magicians and all of the people in Egypt that should have been able to help him, and they couldn't. And then the one that was in prison, the cupbearer, the butler, spoke up and said, "Hey, you know what? I remember when we were in prison, there was a Hebrew slave who interpreted our dreams. And he can probably do that for you too." So Joseph went and did that for Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh promoted him. So my thing was, when Pharaoh promoted him, that very likely could have meant that Joseph was now the actual boss of his boss. He was promoted to be number 2 in Egypt. How's that? How's that for a theory? I just thought that was just fascinating to kind of go through all that. Okay, so here we are in the timeline, and where we are in the timeline is after the Exodus, and that would put us over here. Oh, let's go back one. That would put us here. That's where we are now in this area. We're in the area of the making of the nation of Israel. Okay. Okay. Now, let's go on. know, forward. Oh, here it is. It's different on here than it is to move the slides forward. It's different on here than it is on PowerPoint. But I think I've got it. By George, I think I've got it. Okay. So remember this chart, Messianic genealogy, from last week, I think. And the thing I want to point out on here is it is actually, the Bible doesn't tell us every single thing that happened in history. Of course, it couldn't, it would be just way too big. But it does tell us enough to help us create this story of getting to the Messiah. So we're about here. We're with Judah and Judah and Jacob. Well, Jacob has been born, and so he is now in Egypt. No, yeah, they're in Egypt now. So that's where we are in the timeline, or on that genealogy. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here and go to the next slide. All right, so remember when we talked about Jacob, who is here, and of course he was in line from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the ones you always hear. Of course, Jacob was renamed. He was given a new name of Israel, but we never stop hearing him being called Jacob. Sometimes he's called Jacob, and sometimes he's called Israel. So you have to go through the context of what you are looking at to know if you're talking about the man, Joseph, or are you talking about the country, Israel? So are you talking about Joseph, who was renamed to Israel, or are you talking about Israel, the country, the ancient Israel country? Are you talking about the tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob that was renamed Israel? Are you talking about modern day Israel that's had parts of their land carved out for different things, like that whole land deal in the Middle East that the whole fight is about right now? Or are you talking about the northern kingdom? When the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel split, the southern kingdom was called Judah, but it was actually like the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. So the northern tribe was Benjamin and Judah. No, that was the southern tribe. And the northern tribe was called Israel. And that was everybody else, all the other tribes. Okay? So that's later on when we get there, but it is good to be able to distinguish who we're talking about when we say Israel. Are you talking about Jacob, the one that was renamed Israel, or are we talking about the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob, or are we talking about the northern kingdom? We're talking about modern day Israel. So there's a lot of different ways that one word can be used. Okay, so let me see if I can pull up. Here we go, right there. All right. So let's think about Jacob's house for a minute. So he's married to these two women, Leah and Rachel. Leah is older, Rachel is younger. He worked 14 years for the both of them for his mom's brother, Laban. So his uncle, Laban. Okay. And what is so interesting about the dynamics of this family? These two ladies were constantly coming at Jacob, trying to get him to give them children. Because it was a great honor in the days of Jacob to be given children. So Leah ends up having 6 boys: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and there should be 2 S's in Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel ends up having 2 boys, which is these 2 here, Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph, who is the one that was sold to Potiphar, that ended up in jail with the butler and the baker, he had 2 boys, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh, even though Manasseh was born first, you hear so much more about Ephraim. They were actually adopted by Jacob. They were adopted by Jacob. So sometimes when you hear the 12 tribes, it's talking about some of these plus the half tribe of Manasseh or the half tribe of Ephraim, and then sometimes it has Joseph in there, and sometimes not. And sometimes the tribe of Levi is left out because they are not including Levi in something. For example, Levi wasn't included in the land distributions when we get to that part. Okay, let's clear this. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So this week was Exodus 1 through 22. Recall how the 400 years that Moses was promised that his people, his descendants, would be in slavery. I thought it was interesting. I went back and looked at it, that they were actually in prison those 400 years, but Moses was told that. He was actually told that right at the time when God was giving him that promise. But then right in that same verse, it says, but you Moses, that's what's going to happen to your descendants. But you will have a long and peaceful life. So long before the tribes of Israel ended up in Egypt, Moses, Abraham already knew that his people were going to be enslaved. I thought that was just fantastic that that was told beforehand. Okay, so Exodus 3 talks about the burning bush, and that's when the name of God is revealed right here. And then Moses protests, giving excuses about, I can't go because I can't speak and all of that. God gives Aaron to Moses as his spokespiece. And in this story right here, where Moses is returning to Egypt, we're going to talk about that strange thing that happened on the way back to Egypt, and God wanted to kill Moses, and how his wife stepped in and prevented that from happening. Okay. And then Moses confronts Aaron. I'm going to call out this one. God reaffirms his covenant. That was in chapter 6. And we heard all of this in the soundtrack. I'm just going back over it. And then in chapter 12 is where the institution of Passover is instituted, and that's one of the major festivals. And of course, in chapters 7, 8, and 9 is the plagues, along with the firstborn here. Then in 13, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and God leads with a pillar of fire. And these are just great, great classic stories. 16 was the provision of the manna and the Sabbath. And what hit me, and I don't know why I never saw this, or maybe I saw it, but I just realized all over again that it says that God gave them manna and they ate manna for 40 years, and that they were supposed to, every day before Sabbath, pick up enough for both days, because they weren't supposed to gather on the Sabbath day. And sometimes we don't hardly even want to do leftovers, right? But every week, at least one of those days of the week, they were doing leftovers of the manna to have something to eat. And of course, that is when they talked about Sabbath. We're going to talk a good bit about Jethro. I did a little deep dive on him. That was awesome. This is where the people were told to consecrate, and I did some study on that word, and that just means to sanctify yourself. It even explicitly says, oh, you can't see my screen. It even explicitly says, wash your clothes. Wash your clothes, abstain from sex with your wives, and get prepared to meet me. Exodus 20 talks about the 10 Commandments. And we know when we look at the Jewish Torah laws, there are actually 613 of those laws that they're supposed to follow. That's amazing. Okay. Then we're going to talk a little bit about this lending and interest. Now, let me see, can I clear this? Can I clear it? Oh, that didn't clear it. I don't know how to do that. Okay, we'll go next. All right, so Moses, and these are the call outs that I found interesting. I did a little bit more research on. the capacity to believe. This is Moses seeing the burning bush in the desert. I imagine he reached out like, is it hot? Is it really hot? Why isn't it burning? Why isn't it being consumed? So he was curious enough to go there and just kind of look. It was very, very abnormal. So in that moment, Moses knew that something unusual was happening. So when God called out to him from the bush and told him to take off his sandals because he was on holy ground, it was really easy for him to believe, okay, this is God because this bush isn't burning and now the bush is talking to me. So that was one of the things I found interesting. So I did this YouTube short and I made a little video about that. So, and then I wrote, Moses already believed it was God speaking to him from the bush because it was not normal for the bush to be on fire and not burn. But he doubted the Israelites would believe his story. So God gave Moses fire power miracles to turn his staff into a snake, to heal his hand, and to turn water to blood to help the Israelites believe he was actually sent by God. So in Logos, there is this really good feature that you can hover over these little icons. You have to turn them on in the formatting because they don't have to stay there all the time, and you can tell who is speaking. So, for instance, right here, if you hover over this one, for the megaphone, it says, the God of the Hebrew and Christian faiths. And when you hover over this one, you'll see that it says that, and that represents who's being spoken to: Moses, author of the biblical book, judge and leader, brother of Aaron and Miriam, and leader of the Hebrew people. So Exodus 3:13 through 15 talks about, and Moses said to God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel and say unto them, the God of your fathers have sent me unto you. And they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. And God said moreover to Moses, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. What I wanted to say about this is, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it beautiful that if I say, I am Lorrinda, I have to tell you who God is before I tell you who I am? Isn't that great? Okay, so we'll move on here. Now, Moses grew up in Egypt because, you know, the story, he was pulled from the river. His mom put him in there. He was pulled from the river by Pharaoh's daughter, and he was actually nursed by his own mother and given to Pharaoh's daughter to be his son. So she adopted him. And one day, when we know the story, one day when Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he stepped in and he killed the Egyptian. And then another day, he saw two Hebrews fighting, and he's like, y'all shouldn't fight. And they were like, well, who made you king? Who are you? Who made you prince over us? And they also said, are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? So people were watching. Moses didn't think anybody saw that. So, of course, that got back to Pharaoh. And so then Moses decided he was going to flee. He fled Israel. I'm sorry, he fled Egypt. And where did he go? He went here to Midian. Okay? And look at the Midianites was one of the sons of Keturah, who was the second wife of Abraham. Well, actually, like third wife, because Hagar was actually a wife. She wasn't the main wife, but a concubine is like a lower wife. So really, the third wife, Keturah. But this lady and Abraham had a son, Midian, and that is where Moses goes to. Now, keep in mind that Abraham and Keturah were his parents. So, assuming Midian was born while Abraham, well, clearly he was born while he was still alive, but surely he taught him about his God, about his customs, and that kind of thing. So, that's what I wanted to point out on here. I do not know how to clear this stuff off of here. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. So Moses fled to Midian, and they were at the well. The daughters of Jethro was at the well. Moses helped them out, and when they got back home, Moses was like, "Hey, why are y'all back so fast?" And this is a man with 7 daughters, and they said, "Well, a man helped us out, and so we got done early. I mean, he helped you. He's thinking, I have 7 daughters. Why didn't you invite him to come back with you?" So Moses ended up marrying one of Jethro's daughters. Her name is Zipporah, and they actually, start their family. So Jethro is a Midianite priest. And in the 18th chapter of Exodus, this is what it says. And Jethro said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh." So he was talking about the Exodus there, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, than all gods. Little g, notice that right here. For in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. Okay? Them. And Jethro, Moses' father in law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came, and all the elders of Israel, to eat bread with Moses' father in law before God. So he was a priest of Midian, but it sounds like it's true that some of the commentators said that they worshiped many gods. And maybe, as some of them said, this was Moses' introduction to Yahweh, to the God of the Bible, through a man who was already introduced in the bush, but now he's encountering him from an actual person, his father in law. So we're actually going to talk now about Jethro. He's a priest of Midian. We talked about where Moses fled to, and he married his wife Zipporah. That was in Exodus 4. And that story in Exodus 4, where God wanted to kill Moses, and his wife Zipporah steps in, circumcises their son, says something about, now you're a bloody husband to me, and that stopped God from killing Moses. Now, there's not a lot of details there, but what we can put together is clearly she's the daughter of a priest. Clearly, this priest knew about the God of Israel because he says there's no other greater. So he knew about the God of Israel. And clearly, they talked about this circumcision thing before because there was something going on there. And there was something about doing the circumcision that made God leave Moses alone. So Zipporah is jumping into action, circumcising the son, and then putting the bloody foreskin at the feet of her husband. Some scholars say at the feet of the child. But that whole scenario makes a little bit of sense if you remember. Well, makes a little bit more sense if you remember that Zipporah was the daughter of a priest that knew Yahweh. And Moses was raised Egyptian. So he wasn't deep into the rituals and things that Zipporah had. He was probably leaning to Egyptian ways and culture and all of that. So in the other notable thing that Jethro does is when Moses is sitting day and night trying to judge the people, he's like, man, you're gonna wear yourself out. Appoint different levels of mediators, of leaders. Some 100, some 10, some different ones. And if that can't solve the thing, then you bring the hard cases to me. Moses took the advice of his father-in-law, and how that reads is really sounds so much like our court system that we have today, how it's set up. District court, local court. Zipporah was the wife of Moses, one of the daughters of Jethro. She's one of 7 daughters. She's probably a Cushite black woman or Ethiopian. She was the daughter of the priest. And clearly, because of her ability to just jump in, they had some kind of ritual for circumcision that may not have sat well with Moses and his Egyptian self, his tendencies. So that is Zipporah. In Exodus 12, oh, I didn't customize that, sorry. But it talks about the Passover. The Passover is one of the major feasts of Israel. And I did do a video about Passover. God required every male Jew to be in Jerusalem 3 times a year. Wow. On Passover. Okay, let me start back presenting. God required every male Jew to be in Jerusalem 3 times a year. On Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Okay, so that actual graphic that you see there, that was straight out of Logos. It's actually a really good graphic for showing that. This was a spread of an example of what a Passover meal might look like. A modern one, clearly. Now let's talk a little bit about lending. In Exodus 22, it says, "If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. If thou at all take thy neighbor's raiment to pledge, thou shalt deliver it unto him by that the sun goeth down." So this lending here, it talks a lot about different rules, different kind of lifestyle things in those chapters, but I'm just picking out this lending here in chapter 22, verses 24 through 26. It talks about regulations against charging interest to a fellow Israelite. And loans were encouraged because it may enable a poor person to regain their independence. Apparently, there is this concept of secured loans talked about there because it talked about the garment as surety, as a pledge. So that's like the actual security for the loan. The Rothschilds are one of the famous families, Jewish families, that was into this profession of lending. Now, if you are a Jew and you don't have very many choices to be one occupation or another because you're living in foreign territory, you come up with the idea that you're going to be the one to be the lenders. And so that's where the Rothschilds' wealth came from, is actually by being bankers. And that dynasty still continues today. That name Rothschilds comes from the red flag that hung outside their ghetto house in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany. This word Judengasse, perhaps. There's a German word that means ghetto or or alley for Jews. And that is what I have for this time in the slides. So now what I want to do is actually show you this really, really neat map that is inside, oops, uh, the neat map that is inside Logos. And I'm going to share this right now. This is share screen window right here. Okay. This is actually a map of that area. And this is inside of Logos. So here's Egypt over here. And this was probably the route taken to Mount Sinai. And this is the region called Midian, right here. So Moses goes from over here to over here when he was fleeing from Pharaoh. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, we know that this area right here, just by looking at the topography of the map, we know this is the Dead Sea right here. We know that's the Sea of Galilee. And we know Jerusalem was about right here, where you see my cursor. So today, this area of Midian is like called Jordan, or Saudi Arabia right here. So that was the Midianites from Moses' wife, Keturah. So those are the things that I wanted to point out. And hopefully some of that was intriguing or helpful to you. And you know that our mission here is to integrate never changing truth with ever changing technology. And I pray that the Lord watches between me and thee while we are absent, one from another. And Lord willing, I will see you all next.